Parent involvement is pivotal to any young person's achievements in life. At Dupton, one of the key things we've done is extend the day. This has involved after-school activities. We've gone from 6% to nearly 70% of young people being part of those activities. But more importantly, we've also had the parent involvement. Parents now value the education by seeing what happens. They are part of the after-school program. They've come in as people who are helpers and volunteers. Moreover, we have parents involved in adult learning, 150 parents learning for themselves. When they go home, they talk about education of their young person. They talk about literacy and numeracy. They want the young person to be involved in their education because they're involved in their education. All these things come together to make a far more viable learning environment for young people in disadvantaged areas such as Dupton. We're seeing the progress that is being made through such programs come to fruition by young people now getting to school on time, being part of their learning in a really applied way, and therefore seeing the benefits of a future pathway in which they want to be successful. This has been a huge transition in a place that had for many years been generational unemployment and generational poverty. We're now seeing the benefits of all this coming together.
It is important that my family helps me with my learning because when I grow up, you're going to need to know measurements, litres, milliliters and all that kind of stuff. They help me by, like when I'm doing my homework, they help me give me the answers, but they don't give me the answers straight up. They secretly give me the answers, but I just don't realise it. Well, I sit down on my bottom bunk and read with my mum that way. I read with them by talking out loud, and if I mispronounce a word, they will give me the correct pronunciation, so then I retry again. I have talked to my mum and dad a bit about being a scientist, but not much.
What do you think they think about it?
I think they will be proud if I become a scientist.
Yes, because my mum helps me with my homework and my maths, and sometimes she helps me with my reading. It's important for my family to help me learn because when I get older I can be smarter. Reading at home is like I sit down in the lounge room with a blanket and my mum sits next to me and I read to her, but sometimes it's my dad. When I leave school, I'm going to be a netball champion of netball. I've talked to my mum about this and dad.
And what did they think about that?
They thought it was very interesting.
It's important for my family to help me learn.
Why?
Because I can write books and send messages. I cuddle up to my mom in her bed and she reads the book to me. Sometimes I read books to my mom and dad or my sisters and brothers. When I grow up, I like to be a worker.
A worker? Okay. Doing what sort of work?
Like doing it at the shops or or building. My family helps me learning at home by helping me and educating me when I desperately need to be. My parents help me with math and writing because they actually tell me if I've got spelling mistakes or handwriting wrong in my writing and in my maths. My parents tell me if I've got stuff going, if I've got sums and so on. When I'm older, I want to be a famous gymnast or an art teacher because art and gymnastics are one of my favorite things.
My family helps me with my learning by giving me harder books and challenging me. It's important with my family to help me because they care about my education and they want me to do better with my life. I read with my brother when he goes to bed, like books to him, and then he just goes to bed. When I grow up and leave school, I want to be a rugby league star.
Have you talked to your parents about that?
I talked to my parents last night about it.
And what did they say?
They said, just train harder and do well at school.
Fantastic. It was great to enjoy that video together, and it was a video that was made in partnership with ARACY and produced by Doveton College using their in-house production team. It's so good to get a child's perspective on this area. It's an area that's not widely explored, but as we know that when young people start to move into adolescence, their drive for independence will really gain momentum. But research indicates that teenagers really need their parents more than ever at that critical time. And of course, I'm sure all of you in the room are well aware of that, whether that's through your own experience with your families or in your professional life. The two school communities that you'll be seeing, the first here is Doveton College, and there is another later in the program where you'll see a video. They're working with students of all ages to try and explore the concept of parental engagement from a child's perspective, which I think is a fantastic piece of research. So it's lovely to join you this afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lisa O'Brien. I'm the CEO of the Smith family, and it's a pleasure to be co-hosting this conference with ARACY. And I also have the pleasure now of introducing our first speaker for the afternoon. She is a senior lecturer on education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and the faculty director of Education Policy and Management Master's Program. Over the last 20 years, Dr. Mapp's research and practice focus has been on the cultivation of partnerships between families, community members and educators, partnerships that support student achievement and school improvement. I am very much looking forward to hearing from her. Please welcome to the stage Dr. Karen Mapp.
Thank you so much.
Great to have you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, you can do better than that. Good afternoon. Ah, there we go. Much, much, much better. I know you've had some rice and some carbohydrates, so you might be a little down, so I'm going to do everything I can to bring you back up, all right? One of the ways I do that is I don't like podiums. I like to be near you, because a lot of family engagement work is about relationships. And so one of the things that sometimes I do when I go to schools is I look to see, are there barriers between families and school staff? And so we try to move those away so that we can reach out and touch everybody, okay? So I'm gonna move around a little bit. I hope I don't drive the cameraman crazy with dancing about, but that's what I'm going to do. So first of all, my students have pushed me very hard to use social media. And I used to have this slide last in my PowerPoint, but they said, Professor Mapp, you have to put it first. Because if you put it first, then people will tweet as you talk. So there it is. So that's my Twitter handle, and please make sure you also use the Twitter handle for the conference, which I think is PEC 2017, is that right?
No, PEConf.
17, okay. So if you look on the brochure and things like that, you'll see it, right, Barbara? Okay, good. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. If it works, I'm not getting any movement. Guys in the back, is there something happening? It's not moving? Is it on? So I'm going to ask you a question while we try to get this working. How many of you in this room have been classroom teachers? Ah, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Let me ask you a quick question then, secondly. How many of you, there we go, how many of you in your pre-service training, okay, received a full course, not a workshop, a full course on family engagement? Let me see those hands go up. Uh-oh. One. There were a lot of hands raised a mere 10 seconds ago. But as you can see, we have done a pretty lousy job of building our own capacity to work with families. This is a question I get asked a lot. Why is it, after all these years of research, 40 years now, we have wonderful research linking family engagement with student outcomes, family engagement with wonderful outcomes for our schools and our districts, but yet we are still struggling to have effective practice in family engagement? Well, you just saw why. The big reason why is that we have not built the capacity of our staff or our families to partner. Now, when I travel around the world, sometimes I notice that we are spending a little more time on building the capacity of our families. So we have perhaps family coordinators in our schools, or maybe we have parent universities or parent academies. But we have to spend the same amount of time and resource on our staff, on our practitioners, as we do on building the capacity of our families. Because if we don't do that, ladies and gentlemen, we end up with what we call disequilibrium. We end up with our families learning how to be engaged, getting all charged up. We're all excited. And then they go to the school. Chilly climates. Oh, no, no, no. We know we're not going to share power with you. We haven't learned how to do that well. So that's why we can't just spend time on parent universities. We have to spend time on building the practice of our teachers, our school leaders, our central office staff. So what happened was in 2011, Secretary Arne Duncan called me and said, you know, we are really interested in doing better. And actually they got a bit of a push from a national group that was formed, and Heather Weiss and I and Ann Henderson and others were really pushing the federal government around changing policies to be more supportive of family engagement. And so because of that push, they decided to have me come in as a consultant for about 2 years to figure out what was it the federal government could offer to schools and districts that would help them around family engagement. And so because of the interviews I did with some of the staff at the Department of Education, but also with practitioners in the field and parents and other researchers and policymakers, I thought about something that might help people understand what does effective practice look like. So in addition to the data I collected from the field itself, and then pairing that with what we know from the research, and not just research on family engagement, but also research from things about how do we build trust with one another. So Tony Bright at the Chicago Consortium on School Research has done wonderful work. It's a book called Trust in Schools, where they talk about how do we build those bonds of trust among the adult stakeholders that support our children. I also looked at the adult motivation and learning work. How do we get people to change their practice? And also leadership development research. So taking all of those things together, we put together a framework that was intended to be what we say is a compass, a guide, and not a roadmap. Now, what's the difference? The reason why we say a guide, a compass, and not a roadmap is because when I was Deputy Superintendent for Family and Community Engagement in Boston, I would have people from Detroit and San Francisco and Los Angeles and Chicago come to see me and they'd say, Dr. Mapp, we're going to just take your blueprint that you put together in Boston and we're going to apply it to Los Angeles. Not a good idea, because the context is very different. And so we decided that providing you and everyone else out there trying to do effective family engagement with a compass, with direction, was the best way to go, rather than 1, 2, 3, 4 steps. So what I'm going to try to do now is share with you what we put together in the framework. I've been hearing from you as I've walked around this lovely conference that you want really practical strategies. And so that's what we're going to try to offer you this afternoon. So this is the dual capacity framework for family-school partnerships. And so I'm going to go through the framework, but I'm also going to talk to you about things I've noticed about effective practice in the field. And so we'll go through these one by one. So first of all, you all absolutely wonderfully displayed the problem around capacity. We're all told, go forth and do family engagement. But we haven't been trained on how to really do it well. And it's a skill, and it's hard. So we have to provide you with support. So part of the reason why we've had these ineffective practices is because, again, we don't have the capacity. We haven't built the capacity to do the work well. So how many of you in this room, and this is the metaphor I used yesterday because we did a deep dive on the framework, but how many of you have ever ridden a bicycle in your life? Let me see those hands. Okay. So what I'm going to share with you right now are what we call, or what I call, the essential bike parts of effective family engagement practice. Now, why do I say bike parts? Let me ask you a question. What are the essential components of every single bicycle? What are they? Wheels. What else? The frame. What else? The pedals, the handlebars, the seat, right? Brakes, chain. Okay, those are pretty much the essential parts of every bicycle. But if I am riding a bike in the Tour de France, never going to happen, ladies and gentlemen, am I going to use the same bicycle I would use to go up in the mountains? No, of course not. What's going to be different? The wheels, the tires. The tires on the mountain bike are going to be thick, right? The tires on the racing bike, thin. What else? The frame. I heard the frame. Frame is going to be heavy on a mountain bike, thin on a racing bike. Now, they all have a frame. They all have tires. They all have handlebars. But depending on the context, the shape and the design might be a little different. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about the essential elements of effective practice of family engagement. But depending on where you are, you might be in Tasmania or Queensland or Melbourne. They might be a little bit different, but what I want to try to get you to think about is that you have to have them to have effective practice. Just like you had to have those parts to have a bike, this is what you'll need to have effective practice, okay? So you see these conditions. We call them opportunity conditions. These are the opportunities that you have to create in your family engagement initiatives in order to have effective practice. The ones on the right, we call those organizational conditions. Those are the conditions that your organization, your institutions, your schools, your district offices have to have for you to provide you with the tools and support to do this work well. Your organizations have to see family engagement as systemic. It's a part of your systemic practices for whole school reform. Family engagement has to be integrated into everything you do, whether it's human resources or innovative technology, working with instruction. It's got to be in everything. And we also have to make sure you're provided with the right resources to do the work well. Now, on the other side are what we call process conditions. So if you're designing a family engagement initiative, whether it's an open house, parent-teacher conferences, or other things, literacy nights, each one of these 5 components needs to be a part of that planning in order for you to have a successful program. The first one Linked to learning. All that we do should be linked to learning. In other words, when you look at your family engagement initiative, ask yourself a question. Do our families learn more about what their children should know and be able to do as a result of their participation in this event? And are they able to learn something about how to support their child's learning from participating in this event? Do they get a chance to practice something new? We are very good at handing our families lists and saying, toodaloo, go and do this at home, but never showing them what it is, never giving them a chance to practice it with our teachers, with our other staff. So everything we do, ladies and gentlemen, should be linked to learning and development. So if you look at your school goals, your family engagement initiatives should be aligned with those school goals. We do a lot of what Kate Gilchristly, one of our colleagues, calls random acts of family engagement. Oh, we'll try this, we'll do that, and none of it is connected to what we are trying to do in the classroom. And you know what? Our families know, and that's why they don't come back. They want to learn more about how to help support their children and not just talk about this or that. That's not related. So linked to learning is very important. What's another condition that has to be a part of the work that we do? It needs to be relational, ladies and gentlemen. We've talked this morning when Debbie Pusher gave her presentation, someone in the audience said, this is all about trust, isn't it? Well, if we want to build trust, we have to spend time, be very intentional about building relationships with people. So I'm going to give you a quick example. Now I'm going to really make the cameraman terrible. He's going to say, what's going on? Tanya, how are you?
I am great.
Where are you from?
I'm from Melbourne.
You're from Melbourne. Nice to meet you.
You too.
Let's see, who else can I say? Hi, Catherine. How are you?
I'm very well,
Where are you from?
I'm from the Northern Territory.
You're from the Northern Territory. Okay. Sir, hi, Michael.
How are you?
Where are you from?
Tasmania.
Tasmania. So you see, ladies and gentlemen, in order for me to develop relationships, I've got to come and reach out and touch people. You have to see people. You have to smile at them. You have to make them know that you care. You can't do that with a piece of paper. You can't do that with a text. You have to reach out and touch your families. I heard somebody ask a question the other day about, we have a lot of hard-to-reach parents. Guess what? I've never met a hard-to-reach parent. Never. What's hard to reach are institutions. Why? Because we create these barriers between us and our families. And so we have to reach out, folks. We have to be not afraid to go into the communities. We can't always ask people to come up here with us because this feels very intimidating for a lot of people. So you have to make relationship building a part of the work that you do. We also want to make sure that we have an asset-based, strength-based mindset. Now, I'm going to tell you a little secret. As soon as I get my chance, I'm going to change that development versus service orientation to asset versus deficit-based thinking. Now, working for governments, how many of you have worked for governments? You know how sometimes they don't like us to use certain language, right? So they said, oh, no, that's too harsh. But it makes the point, right? Asset-based, growth mindset versus deficit-based. That's what we're really trying to say instead of development versus service. Development means, yes, we have a growth mindset versus just providing services to families and saying that families need us. Development is more collaborative, and that's the next one. Debbie did a wonderful presentation today about funds of knowledge and parent knowledge. This is why we have to have a collaborative space, a collaborative culture, because our families know a lot about their children. We need to be equal partners with our families. And so to have that collaborative culture where we honor families' knowledge, their funds of knowledge, their parent knowledge is key. We can't be the best practitioners that we can be without our families. And then finally, all of our initiatives and programs have to have an interactive component. If we just talk at people all the time and we don't give them a chance to practice, they never really learn. That's how we learn, is through practice. So those are the big components of family engagement. Those are the things you have to have in every single program you design for your families. Now, what happens when we start to really put these effective steps into place? You're going to find that your adults begin to grow. And we always talk about capacity building, don't we? But we never define what we mean by capacity. And this is where we've developed, and so I kidded Bill yesterday, Lucas. I said, you stole my concept of the C's, because he had the 7 C's, right? I said, I had my 4 C's first. So we talk about the 4 C's around capacity. What do we really mean? So my colleague Monica Higgins, who's at Harvard, she's talked about this is how we can define capacity. And actually you can measure this, ladies and gentlemen. So what do we see happen when we're really building these partnerships? Well, first of all, adults begin to grow in their skills and knowledge, what they know, what they're able to do. But you know, a lot of times we stop there and we don't realize there are other ways that adults grow and learn. What's another way? Our connections, our networks. Now we have parent-to-parent networks, we have parent-staff networks. People now feel like they're supported. For a lot of teachers, I bet you would tell me that sometimes being a teacher can feel isolating. Sometimes you feel alone. But when you have your families, you feel like you have that extra social capital. So we grow in terms of our connections and our networks. What else do? We grow in terms of our cognition. You know, I didn't always believe, and I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't always believe that there wasn't such a thing as a hard-to-reach parent. I didn't always believe that until I started to go out and interview families and spend time with families, and they said to me, Miss, it's not that we don't care, it's that a lot of times we don't know how to do some of the things the schools would like us to do, or we're intimidated, or they've really kind of been disrespectful to us and so we're not going back. Or they always think that we can come at the time that they set up, and they haven't asked us, when can we come? So through my experience, my cognition, my beliefs and values about families changed significantly. I also used to think that families, I used to describe families as our customers, right? Because I believe that when I work with my principals, if they saw families as customers, that they would treat them better. But I've transformed again. Families aren't our customers. They're our equal partners. And they are our co-producers and co-creators of excellent education systems for our students. Because customer is still distant from us, isn't it? It's not right there with us making decisions. Last but not least, we grow in terms of our confidence. We start to get really confident in being able to do this work. So when we really grow, we start to see that now we've got staff that can do this work very, very well. They're comfortable with families. They welcome families. They're actually also culturally competent, can think about the context. We also now have families who are comfortable in being engaged in lots of different roles, whether it's at home, because not all of our families can always come to the school, in the community, and then perhaps even at school. So what I want to do now is I want to share with you what I've seen out in schools and districts that are operationalizing the framework. What are some of the practices that I've seen that you might want to think about that actually help them do this work well? So this is again the framework, and I'm going to give you a link later on for how you can actually get an article about the framework. But here are the 7 high-impact practices that I've really seen working well to try to, again, align and operationalize the framework. So the first thing, places that are doing this work well actually have an infrastructure. for family engagement in place. So either at the central district office or at the school, there's someone who is in charge of this work, who can oversee this work. They're a dedicated part of the senior leadership team. So the district leader has someone or a team that's assigned to coordinate the work throughout the schools in the region. Without that, it's very difficult to coordinate good, strong family engagement practice. Number 2, again, family engagement is linked to learning. It's linked to the teaching and learning goals of the district, of the schools. So we look at our data, we see where our kids may be struggling or where there are challenges, and we say that's what our family engagement is going to focus on. So for example, in Boston, in the secondary schools, we noticed the students were lagging behind a little bit in their literacy. So the district strategies around family engagement were aligned with what? Literacy. Again, instead of doing these random acts of family engagement, they align their family engagement practice to help families support their literacy efforts and goals. Policies are changed to make sure that they enhance and enable and not constrain your family engagement. So you may have to look at your policies around when can families and teachers talk to one another. Yesterday we heard a wonderful demonstration, or saw a wonderful demonstration about the high school and changing the way that they did their parent-teacher conferences, changing the time. Those are the things that you're going to have to do. Think about, does this policy help us or hurt us when it comes to working with our families? Number 4, a high priority is placed on cultivating and sustaining those relationships. And I demonstrated, you have to have genuine face-to-face contact with your families. You have to create opportunities for people to get to know each other as human beings. I went to one school where they actually had their open house out in a field, and it was a barbecue. And people did something called human bingo. How many of you have ever played human bingo? Okay? Human bingo is where you have a bingo card and you have to find someone who meets those characteristics. So they say someone who speaks a second language, someone who immigrated here from another country. So you have to go around and find folks. And nobody knew who were the teachers, nobody knew who were the parents, but it was a great way to mix and mingle. We do these things at what? Weddings and showers, right? But we don't often use these icebreakers to get to know our families. So that's something to think about. Number 5, regular opportunities are created for authentic and meaningful engagement of families and students and community members in decision making. Let me give you an example as to what I'm talking about here. One time in Boston, we were going to change the way students pick their schools. And what happened was a group of experts went into the back room and came up with a new strategy. And then I was called in and said, Karen, can you have some community meetings to get parent input? I said, input on what? You've already made the decision. They said, but no, if you do these meetings, that will count as community engagement. No. I said, we either do it my way or we're not doing it at all. And then I waited to get fired. But I didn't, because they said, you know, you're right. We've made the decision and we haven't really asked our families. And so what we then did was we had roundtables and we had focus groups, and we actually then appointed a few parents on the team to come up with the new design. This is what I mean about meaningful and authentic engagement. Not that false engagement that we try to pull off on our families, and they know the difference. Number 6, robust professional development is provided for our practitioners on family engagement. And what I mean by robust is not a one-off workshop. It's the kinds of things we're doing here at this conference, but I hope will continue because it's very difficult for people to change their practice without practice. And Jenni actually is going to talk about that in her presentation. So the places that are serious about this, they've come up with coaching strategies, training strategies for not only their teachers, but for everyone in the building, school nurses, people who provide lunch service for our families and for our students. And then finally, we develop accountability and assessment systems to measure family engagement. Because what we measure, we can change. We want to see, how are we doing? Have we had any impact on those 4 C's? So these are places that are very, very, very serious about this work. So what I want to do before I close is just to provide you with some additional support and resources for this work. Some of you may know, and some of you in the audience, I've met some folks who actually attended my summer workshop. We have an institute every summer in July for 3.5 days where we do a very deep dive on family engagement, and I have a lot of my colleagues present. In fact, Heather has presented at this particular, Heather Wise. We have Ann Henderson, we've had Nancy Hill, who does work on family engagement for the secondary school level. So this is something, I may be too late for this year, but we'd love you to consider for next year. I actually have a free online course. Yes, I said free. It is free. So all you have to do is sign up, and it equates to about a 6-week course on family engagement. Many of the videos that are in there, you are free to download and use in your own staff development. So this is basically freeware for you. If you need a unit certification, I don't know if they have that here in Australia for teachers, where you have to show that you've taken a course to get credit. You can get that certificate at the end, and that is a charge of about 50 or 60 USD, okay? And we also, thank goodness, and this has been a lot of hard work, and I'm very excited about the release of a new book. It's called Powerful Partnerships. It will be released in July. It's being published by Scholastic. And this is a book that I've written with 2 teachers, which will contain lots of wonderful strategies for teachers on how to build effective, trusting, and respectful relationships with families. And so one of the things that I've tried to do at this conference is be on time, and I know that my time is up, and I hope this was helpful, so thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Karen. So many practical ideas that will, I'm sure for many of us, will be taking away to inform our practice going forward. A framework for enabling family engagement and effective practice. That's a fabulous tool. So thank you for sharing it with us. And I don't think we'll ever forget your visual image of breaking down the barriers. And you know, it highlights the point of being really alert to where those barriers exist and how to make sure you're aware of them, because they absolutely hinder relationship. So thank you very much. And now I'm going to welcome, and just so you know, we'll have an ample opportunity at the end for question and answer from both Karen and our next speaker, who is Jenni Brasington. So Jenni is a Senior Director of Consultative Services for Scholastic Education and a founding partner for the Centre of Active Family Engagement. She has more than 25 years of experience working with pre-K-12 schools as an administrator, early childhood coordinator and a school counsellor to improve student achievement and build effective family-school partnerships that support student learning. She most recently served as the Director of Family and Community Engagement for Accelero Learning, a large Head Start grantee with delegate agencies in 4 states. Welcome, Jenni. Thank you very much.
Is this my clicker right here? So as my good friend Karen said, I didn't dress appropriately, so I get to carry this around today because I don't really have anywhere to put it. So hopefully I'm not causing too much noise. So it's wonderful to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. And I don't like standing there, so I'm going to try to walk around a little bit. So I'm going to talk to you about how do we actually implement what Karen talked about? What are those practices to actually put the dual capacity framework into your everyday work? So that's what we're going to talk about today, the reality of actually implementation and execution. So the work I do at Scholastic now, I work with schools and districts around the country. And they come to training, we talk about the dual capacity framework, we talk about these strategies, and I think they leave the training and wahoo, they go and they implement, because that's what we do, right? However, how many of you go to a conference, you go to a training, you're pumped up, right? You're ready. What happens? So the reality, this is the reality, right? This is the reality. It's the unfortunate reality of training, right? You attend a conference, you attend a training, you're super pumped, right? How many of you get super pumped? Right? Okay. You're ready to implement. But then you go back, right? You go back to your school, you go back to your district, you go back to your site, and all of a sudden, reality hits, right? The reality of every day, the reality of those emergencies, the reality of, I'm not really sure how to do this well, right? I took a bunch of notes. How many of you have ever written those notes, you go back to read them, and you're like, I'm not sure what I actually wrote. Okay, so that's me. And the worst one is those old habits, right? That if you don't have actually somebody supporting you or coaching you, what happens? You fall back into those old habits. Not that it would ever happen to me. So the application is actually pretty low. And then the cycle continues. Okay, so if there's not implementation support or coaching, and if you don't plan for that ahead of time, then training in PD actually is really merely just a vacation away from our daily responsibilities, right? Because the reality is that we all need support. We all need the coaching to actually put this into practice, okay? So, this is my reality. So, I'm an inherent lazy person. I would lay in bed. Like, in fact, I looked at your program that I got, and I was super excited about those 6:30 walks, 6 o'clock walk? How many of you saw me this morning? Because that's me in my bed. I'm not an early morning person. I wasn't getting out of bed, right? I live for my TV shows. I am like addicted to those shows. And I live for like sweet, like I am like a sugar hound. So without my coach and somebody like helping to support me, I fall into all those really, really bad habits, okay? So what I'm here to say today and to talk to you about is what we heard from the schools and the districts that we were working with. And so now when we do our trainings, there's always these two things that are like part of it, is the implementation support and the coaching. Because otherwise, the schools are really, it's hard for them to put it into practice. They need that coach, they need the support. What happens next? And some of the simple things, like I remember when I was teaching, and the thing that I used to say all the time in my parent-teacher conferences, just read with your child, read with your child, read with your child. But the things that I said, I knew what I meant, right? But actually, did my families actually know that? So some of the things that Karen talked about seem so simple. But for the folks that are actually doing this for the first time, they needed those concrete examples. What does it look like? Show me, tell me, help me, model it for me. So that's what we came up with. So, and I believe we're providing this for you, so you should have this. But this is about turning knowledge into action. So based on the framework, Thank you, Karen. We developed an observation checklist and rubric so that you could actually begin to see what are you actually going for? What does that quality practice look like? And when you know you're on the right track. So I'm going to talk about the rubric first. And we started the work that we were doing. We have a family engagement series based on Karen's work. It's called the Dr. Mapp series. It's a 3-part series, and the first folks that we trained was New York City, 120 schools. And when they were done, they said to us, now what? Who's going to help us actually do this, implement this? And so they actually helped us with creating the rubric. So this is what the rubric looks like. It's a process conditions rubric. And it shows folks exactly concrete examples of what it looks like if you're meeting sort of the expectations or you haven't. So the first part of the rubric is, you haven't met them. You haven't met those expectations. You're sort of almost there. You're on that right track. You're moving in the right directions. And then the last column is sort of, you nailed it. That's really where you want to go, okay? So there's concrete examples. Ability to assess those quality practices. So what we heard from the schools and districts was they didn't really know what those quality practices look like, what those concrete examples, what should they be doing? And so we've provided a list for them. How do you monitor progress over time? How do you know whether when you're actually doing this, are you improving, right? Are you getting better? It increases reliability and reduces bias, so everybody is on the same page. So if you were to assess, you know exactly what you're supposed to be looking for. And now there's a common definition of what quality practice looks like. So if I observe somebody doing an event at one school and I go to compare it at another school, I'm not saying, well, that school's better. We all have the same common language of what we mean when we say, under relational, when you nail it, what does that quality practice look like? We all have that same language. There's a developmental path to achieve mastery. So we're all not at the same place. Some of our teachers are very skilled at this, and some, this is brand new. So it gives you a place, a starting point, and now you know where you need to grow, okay? Staff take ownership. So I now know what it looks like. So I know what I'm shooting for. So if you tell me you want me to now implement a family engagement event or initiative at a very high quality, I now know what you mean in terms of linked to learning or interactive or developmental versus service-oriented. What do you mean by that? What are those practices that actually you want me to implement? And now you can target areas of strength and maybe areas that require more skill development in your staff. So what are the things we're really doing well? And what are the things that maybe require a little bit more support for individuals and for a school as a whole? Okay? So that's the rubric. And now you can see here is a little bit better shot of it. So each of the process conditions we've spelled out. And you can see when we look at, say, relational, those characteristics or those behaviors and actions that you may do that really you haven't really met that yet. And when you're sort of almost there, and when you've really nailed it, those quality practices that you're aiming for. So in each of the process conditions, we've given concrete examples of behaviors and actions so that you know exactly what you're shooting for. What does mastery actually look like? And then we work with educators to say, how are you planning for this? So when you're thinking about your events and your initiatives, think about it with the end in mind. If you actually implemented these at a quality level, and took a look at the rubric, what would you expect educators, what would you be doing? What would you be doing under relational? What would you be doing interactive? What would your practices look like? And what would you expect, what would you see and hear from your families? And get folks to actually articulate that out so that you can go back and then measure, did I see this? So what's the next step? So the next step is actually coaching. And when I started this, this coaching work about 5 years ago, I started it at Oscillero. And I remember the family engagement staff looked at me and they said, coaching? You don't coach us. Only teachers get coached. You're observing us? And I said, yes, we're going to observe. And you know what? We're actually going to videotape you. We're going to videotape your practices. And they looked at me like I had 3 heads. And they said, you're going to videotape us? Isn't it just teachers you videotape? And I said, well, that's typically what you think, but your practices are just as important. How you engage with families, those quality practices are just as important as a teacher engaging their instructional practices with students. We can observe your practices just as easily as we can with teachers. So it was when staff started in with Oscillero, it was a given that they were going to be observed and videotaped, just like our teachers. And so that's something I want you to think about, that the coaching that we provide our teachers and our educators, we should be providing our family engagement staff. And the coaching of the coaches that we provide for our instructional staff should be just the same for our family engagement staff. So you have the rubric, now what do you do with it? So you provide some coaching and some observations around your family engagement events. So just something to think about in terms of the coaching aspect and why it's so important. So this is from Joyce and Chowers. If you look at training components in terms of theory, demonstration, practice, feedback, and coaching, coaching gets the highest in terms of the transfer of learning. And without that, it's really hard to implement and put things into practice. Everybody needs a coach. So this is what our reflective coaching cycle looks like. We observe, we pick an event. It's an event, an initiative, or a strategy. We then reflect on it, and I'm going to show you the tool that we use. It's part of the rubric. We analyze the data. Staff that actually implemented the event will do their own self-assessment. Then we meet and do a post-conference. How many of you are teachers in the room? How similar does this sound to some of the things you go through? Right? Exactly the same. And then we plan. So what are the things maybe that we want to focus on for the next time? And then we'll set a new focus. What are the things that your coach or somebody should look for in the next time? And so that's the reflective coaching cycle. So it's intentional. So in terms of our family engagement events, we're not just saying, checking the box off and saying, yes, we did our family engagement event. We're now looking to see, was it a quality event? And did we put into practice the things that we know are the things that we want in terms of building families' capacity? So it's not enough anymore to just say, yep, our families came, yep, we did the event. But now we can go back and say, was this a quality event? And if not, what are the things we want to improve upon? So this is the observation tool. It's aligned to the rubric. And you can decide to just focus on maybe one of those areas of the rubric. So maybe on this occasion, you just want to focus on the link to learning. And you just want to see how closely is your event, your strategy, your initiative, how close is it aligned to learning? Maybe you want to look at both link to learning and collaborative. It's really up to you. Maybe one of you wants to focus on link to learning and another one wants to focus on collaborative. But this is your observational tool. So you can now look and observe and see, are these things actually happening? Okay? I would also strongly suggest you then videotape it so that staff can go back and then watch and see what they did and how they implemented and executed the event. You also now have something to talk about with staff after an event. You have something to debrief on, right? Here are the things that I saw. We also have staff complete this themselves. So based on the rubric, based on their planning, did these things actually happen? Okay? So in terms of how to use the tool, so you choose an event, you determine what to observe, you take good narrative notes, diagrams, pictures. Again, we oftentimes use video, and we tell schools to do that. And then staff will reflect on their own practices, and then we debrief. And then you can determine the conditions that staff consistently implement at a really high level, and the ones where you need additional support. And we've used this with schools and districts now in about 4 different places. Districts are now using these to go in when they have an event. They're using the rubric to pre-plan, and they find now that schools have a better sense or a better idea of, when we talk about the process conditions, what it actually means to implement these things at a very high level. So 2 things to remember: that training and implementation support go hand in hand. That without the implementation support, that actually moving this work forward is challenging for schools. They need that coach. They need somebody in their corner to actually say, well, you talked about this in your plan, you said you were going to do this, but when I actually went to the event, this is what we saw. Or I'm not actually sure what it means for interactive, or I don't know actually what it means for something to be asset-based, or some of the language that you continue to use is this. And so if you don't have somebody actually supporting or watching for these things, it's hard to actually know whether you're actually doing quality family engagement practices. So the rubric has helped schools and districts know, 1, what to focus on, what to shoot for, and what it is they need to focus on. And 2, I would say observations and reflective coaching conversations are not just for teaching staff. That we have to get into this habit of professionalizing our family engagement staff, and so that means we observe, we coach them. And so this is one of the ways we do that. We also have a rubric for our family engagement staff, and we have coaching sessions and a coaching of the coaching model. So I guess I went quicker than I was supposed to, so. Okay, all right. If you want more information on the work we're doing around the rubrics, you can email me, and I think we've provided you a copy of the rubric, and I think our parent coordinator rubric as well. So, yeah. I guess I talk fast. Yeah, I'm staying here.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Jenny. You right?
Yeah, I'm good.
Good. So we've now got quite a lot of time available for question and answers, which is great. Thank you so much. Love the concrete examples, coaching tools, thinking about how to assess. I think that's a really great addition. And given how closely the 2 of you work together, it's fantastic to have a Q&A with you both. So if you'd like to come up and join us as well, Karen, that'd be fabulous. And we'll be opening to questions. I'm going to my instructions were to come and sit with you, so I shall do that. If you want to sit in the middle, and I'll sit here. Fantastic. Look at that, there's a hand up already over here. We'll just get that microphone to you. And if you'd like to introduce yourself, that's always great.
Hi, my name's Sue. I was just really interested to find out, you talked about family engagement staff. Just really interested to hear what that looks like in your context.
So is that to me? So family engagement staff would be like parent coordinators, parent liaisons, family engagement specialists. So that's the staff that we're talking about in terms of when I say parent engagement staff, it's usually like the liaisons, the coordinators, those staff at the school that, I guess, lead the work. And then there's also folks that supervise those folks. But it's typically coordinators or liaisons. And we have a training specifically for those staff, because we know those staff often come into those positions, and those positions used to be much more social service type positions, supporting families around clothing and food. And while that still is a part of it, I think we're moving in the direction that these positions are really parent coaches. And that in order to really be a parent coach, then they that position needs to be elevated and empowered to sit in with instructional staff on professional development. And there has to be some clear expectations around what this position is and does, and that everyone in the school understands that, especially the administrators. So when we do training for these positions, we strongly suggest that administrators come with these staff to these trainings so that everyone is really on the same page in terms of how we drive this work and what the capabilities are of this position. Because there's oftentimes it's not really clear and it's not consistent.
Yeah, I would say that one of the things that has happened in the States, and I do think there are people here who I've met who have similar positions. We started out maybe, I'd say about 20 years ago, with a real wave of hiring parent coordinators and parent liaisons in our schools to do family engagement. Well, I think there were good intentions, but what ended up happening in many cases was that everyone else in the building felt they were off the hook, and that Mrs. Jones or Mr. Williams was the one you went to. They're going to take care of all the family engagement, right? And everybody else said, that's not our job, that's their job. So what we then tried to do was to evolve those positions to say, no, it's not their responsibility to handle all of the family engagement for the school. It's their job to coach everyone else, to build the capacity of everybody in the building to be able to do this work. So you've seen this role shift a bit because, again, for example, in New York City, under, I believe it was Mayor Bloomberg, they decided to hire family coordinators for every single school in New York City. So you're talking over 1,000 people. But there was no real role definition. And so some of those folks ended up selling uniforms and being hallway monitors versus any real intentional, robust family engagement practice. So what Jenni's work and her colleague Ron Muir and others are trying to do is to really professionalize that position, but also to try to get schools to realize that that person should be on your senior team to help you coordinate your family engagement practice. Joyce Epstein talks about action teams, having a committee. Now this person could be the person who actually heads up that committee or helps to drive that committee, but those people need coaching. The other thing we're trying to do is to make sure the people who are hired in this position have some background in family engagement, because a lot of times people were just hiring people with no background in this, and then those folks were really struggling to be able to figure out what to do.
So I would just say one more thing is that I think we provided, I think one of the PDFs I gave, and we were unsure of the time, so I put it in there, but I think one of the PDFs that you actually have is our parent coordinator rubric. And the reason we developed that was that so that there were clear expectations, and I guess folks would understand, have at least a baseline of if we were going to implement this position or if we were writing a new job description, what it is that we were looking for. And it's very much aligned to a parent coach and linking to learning. So I think you actually have a copy of that.
If I could just ask a follow-up question too. So how does the parent coordinator, who's a staff member in the school, do they then relate to other community organisations? For example, in the US, I know Communities in Schools is an organisation that also plays a role in providing support and engaging parents, but they're not, they're often located in the school, but they're not staff of the school. So how does that fit within that framework?
Well, it depends. I think that what we're seeing in many districts is that that's a separate role, but they're very much connected. So if you have schools that are what we call in the States full service community schools, schools that have, are doing a lot of partnerships with community-based organizations, a lot of times you need someone in the building who I would just describe as the conductor, right? Somebody who, or the traffic person who can make sure that the partners coming in, that the work is aligned with the work of the school, making sure that basically the trains are running on time, who's coming in, who's going out. That's a real tough job. One of my students, actually, my former graduate students, is doing that at a school. And so they have a family coordinator in addition to that position, because that position takes a lot of time. They make sure that the partnerships are aligned with the learning. They make sure that, again, the partners know where to be and know what to do. So I think it's difficult to load both of those positions in on one person. It can be difficult, but they are very much aligned and in constant communication with one another.
Great, thank you. A question over here and then one down the back. Sprinting with that microphone, you can do it.
Terrific, thank you. Thank you, panel members, very much for your insight. When we work in schools and school systems, what can we do to encourage leadership and persuade leadership, firstly, of the benefits of doing this, and then secondly, the how to do this?
Well, that's where the organizational conditions really come into play. You have to have leadership at the top level to say that family engagement is really important. Because if it's not coming from the top, then people will not deem it important. So, and I know a lot of times that can be frustrating. We work with teachers who are in schools or in districts where family engagement is not discussed as an important part of the work. And so I always say to them that, you know, do the work within your unit of change. And your unit of change is in your classroom. So you can start doing that work with your families, because I guarantee you what's going to happen is that when your colleagues and your school leaders sees that all of a sudden you have 100% participation at parent-teacher conferences, or your families are always the one who come in and want to do work with the schools, they're going to start asking questions about, hey Jenny, how is it that you have all of this wonderful participation, and not only the participation, but the classroom management in your classroom. The students are eager because they know that you know grandma or grandpa. And by the way, we haven't said this today, but I think we all know this, is that when we say families here, we mean all adult caregivers, right? And so you have to start where you are, and wherever that is good. But the best possible situation is when you have everyone, starting from the top right through, talking about how family engagement is a key and important strategy to whole school improvement and student achievement.
So one of the things I add is that you know, we try to do some work with administrators first before we go in and do our teamwork. And many of the schools and districts that we've started, that we're working with now, we're encouraging them to let those administrators, the ones that want to do this, that want to bring their teams, that start with those folks first. And I remember when I first heard Steve Constantino speak, and he says, you know, we don't have to always do for all, right? And so I would say that same approach would work well for the work that you're doing. That if you have 3 administrators and they are the ones that decide, you know, I'm ready for this work, I'm ready to bring a team, then let those administrators be your lighthouse schools. And I will tell you, you know, administrators are pretty competitive folks. Do I have any administrators? Are there any administrators here? But if they see their colleagues doing something and getting recognized, and they're seeing those outcomes, I will tell you, they're going to want to check out what's happening at that school, and then they're going to want in on it, right? They're going to hear about it. They're going to hear about the work that's happening, and so you start with those folks, and then you build up.
Fantastic. Down the back.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for the wonderful presentation at a time where there's a shortage of leaderful messages coming out of the United States in regards to collaboration and working with, and sharing power, and breaking down walls. So thank you so much. My name's Paul Pritchard, and you're most welcome in Australia.
Okay, excellent, good.
My question to you is I'm particularly interested in what is required across a place that is across one more organisation, across a local service system, to share a culture of authentic engagement that parents recognise and relax with. Because in my experience with my research, when parents encounter helpful, engaging behaviours in one service, and then top-down, expert-led deficit-focused practices in another adjoining service or just down the road, it actually just creates another barrier and flings parents off into the ether and builds the suspicion.
So your question, I'm trying to...
My question is, how do we share a culture across disciplines and services rather than just me and my staff in my school building a culture of engagement? How do we actually work across a place and across a system to have an authentic culture across disciplines?
That's a great question, and it's something that we're starting to use this terminology in the States, and I don't know how broadly it's accepted, but we have this new focus now on something called collective impact, okay? And collective impact is where people are figuring out that, you know, education is everybody's business. It's the business of the housing authority. It's the business of the police department. It's the business of the people who are talking about health. And so we're starting to see where instead of everybody working in silos, people are starting to come together to say, what does asset-based practice look like across all of these domains? I know that Scholastic has a wonderful program called Learning Supports. And it's where we're trying to get all the different pieces to sit down and say, if we really want to do this work across the different institutions and associations, let's really talk about what we can do collectively. So it's hard because that requires people to shed a lot of their, you know, things that they like to keep very close to themselves because they're the experts in that domain. But it's really necessary, and I think that a lot of the superintendents and the educators are starting to figure out if we're not talking to the people in health, the people in housing, the people in other domains, and if we're not all sitting down and saying, look, our families, like Debbie talked today, have parental knowledge and funds of knowledge that we all need, and we need to change the way that we relate to our families, we're not going to get anywhere. So I think de-siloing is really what we're starting to see, and it's starting to work very well. Now, our federal government back in the day was pushing for this type of collaboration through some of the grants that were being issued by the U.S. Department of Education. We're hearing now that a lot of those grants are going to go up in smoke. So, and they were really pushing this sort of place-based, Promised Neighborhoods is one of them. We're really pushing all of those entities to come together to talk about how we're going to service our children as one instead of 12 different organizations doing things differently. So it's hard work, but it can be done.
And some common practices around that would be common definitions of when we say family engagement, what do we mean? What do we mean by that? The differences between parent involvement and family engagement and differentiating that. And sharing those common beliefs and doing some exercises around, you know, those 4 common beliefs around family engagement and sharing them. And so those are 3 things that you can put into practice.
I would say also that convenings like this one, where you get people to see, you know, maybe to get more, I mean, that we have, is it Belinda? Is that our principal who presented yesterday?
Yes,
Belinda?
yeah.
You know, getting more practitioners to come and talk about what they're doing, even getting students and families on the stage, that could be something for next year. And then inviting some of those different institutions to hear people talk about what does it look like when it's working well. Because then people will get inspired and they will need the coaching after, but I think when people hear stories, I mean, I saw people this morning with tears coming down their face when they watched those videos that Debbie Pusher showed. I think if you show more of what it looks like when people are talking about how it can work, they're more likely to work together.
And potentially shared measurement also plays a role as well. So assessment tools like the one that you've taken us through, Jenny, that's also, it's about shared definition but shared measurement as well. And that way everyone's measuring themselves against the same objectives.
Right.
So that's more likely to get a uniform culture over time. Stephen. He's got the
Oh,
line.
I'm just going to take a very brief opportunity to mention ARACY has a tool that helps with getting that alignment between different services. It's called the Common Approach. It's called the Common Approach because it's social workers and so on. It's a holistic sort of child-centered approach based around strengths, exactly what you're talking about. And there'll be a presentation about it later on this afternoon at 3:30 by the manager of Common Approach. So it's exactly along those lines. It's what Paul's identified is correct. If you get all of those different services talking in the same way and supporting parent engagement and thinking about the needs of the child, it is so much more powerful than a school system trying to do it just in isolation.
Fantastic. Philip, Kelly, you've got just down here if you could. You're covering some miles, aren't you? Thanks, Philip.
Yes, Philip's right. In all this, when you're trying to measure any change, we live in a country where we're very keen on compliance and we start giving tangible numbers to stuff. We've only got to look at the whole interest in sort of PISA charts and where we're sitting down and what's happening against other nations. But almost parent engagement is almost sometimes something that's ethereal. It's what could be called a soft skill, and it's a slow burn thing, like we develop that resonance. And so we're looking at very short 3-year election cycles in Australia. How do we actually produce lasting change that's measurable, that we can actually rationalise it to politicians in a way that they cannot refute the power of it?
Well, here's something that's happening that isn't just happening in the States, is that facts don't seem to matter much anymore.
Alternative facts.
And I have found in my 25 years of doing this work that actually sometimes we have 40 years of research, 40 years, that says that family engagement is related to student outcomes. Now, a lot of times we can't replicate those studies in our schools because they take a lot of work. You know, the gold standard in research is a randomized controlled trial. And a lot of times to do that kind of work, and we may not like that that's the case, but it is, a lot of times to do that work you have to be in partnership with a university, right? But you can take a study that says, if we do X around literacy and reading, we have a great study right now that was done by Johns Hopkins University that talks about the power of home visits and how home visits have actually made it so that kids, the attendance rates go up, and the students who get a home visit, they read at grade level. Uh-oh, something just happened there in the back, but that's
no
okay.
afternoon tea now.
Right? But Philip, what I'm trying to say is that we have a lot of,
Some anger management issues in the kitchen.
Somebody's cooking back there. We have a lot of data already that we can use, a lot of studies we can use, but I have to tell you, and we know this, you want to pair those research studies with stories. Stories that really will get to the heart and not just the mind are sometimes what our politicians need to hear to move practice forward. So I would say that I wouldn't get, you do want to collect data, but I think collecting data is more to try to help us with our practice, to help us to do things, as Jenni was talking about, what are we doing that makes sense? What are we doing that we need to improve? I would say you can use, again, the existing research, but pair that with stories from your teachers and your parents. I'll give you a quick example. In Philadelphia, they had a panel of teachers talk about how engaging families has made them want to remain as teachers. And that one panel did more to solidify why we need family engagement. And Philadelphia went from having 7 people on staff in their family engagement office to now hiring 25 people. Whereas other places were going in the opposite, but it was from the stories paired with the data that they were able to make that case.
So we also, in the schools that we've been doing our training with for the last year, we collect their reflections from the time that they've started. So our teams that come to the 3 seminars are administrators, well, again, we say administrators should come, but administrators, teachers, families, a community member, and support staff, whether it's a counselor or a nurse. And so they're 5-member teams or 6-member teams. And they tell us what they believed about family engagement at the start of the training, and then they tell us what they believe now at the end of the training. And some of those reflections have been the most powerful for folks to actually hear and listen to, because you can actually see their beliefs changing about what they believe about families, about what they believe about their role, and how we work together to support student learning. So.
I see your hand up. Don't be shy about asking questions.
Sorry, I'm a hobbit, so it was probably a bit hard for you to see me. My name's Michelle. Thank you so much. It's been an amazing afternoon. My question's for you, Karen. You said earlier, which I thought was really powerful, there's no such thing as a hard-to-reach parent, and you've talked about home visits and the things that you've done. I was wondering if you might be able to talk a little bit about parents, when you're doing those home visits, how you do it in such a way that for parents who perhaps don't feel safe with schools or have had bad experiences with schools, how you approach that in a way that's, I guess, respectful and not feeling like the school is now encroaching on their space. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Okay, great.
Yes,
Thank you.
So I would recommend that you look up the Parent-Teacher Home Visit Project. This is an operation out of Sacramento, California. And what they've done is they've built their home visiting model on a community organizing platform. And so these visits, teachers are trained to do these visits. They're also trained to make the initial phone call home to talk about the visit. And so the phone call home goes as following. They'll call the parent and they'll say, you know, hello, Mrs. Jones, this is Karen, and I am your child's 9th grade teacher, because they do these also at the secondary level. And the phone call carries the tone of Debbie Pusher's presentation. They say, you know, you are your child's first teacher. And as such, I as a teacher would like to learn from you the best ways to help support your child. I need your knowledge in order to be the best teacher I can possibly be for your child. Now, I've interviewed some parents who say to me, I never have gotten a call like that ever. Usually, when I see the phone number from the school, I think it's going to be bad news and I don't pick up the phone. Whereas this was different. This person said, you are an expert. You know more about your child than I do. And so because the tone and the nature of the call is so different, parents will say, yes, now maybe they'll say, we don't want you to come to the home. We'd rather meet at a coffee shop or somewhere else, and that's fine. But the tone of the call is collaborative. It's very different. Again, families tell us it's a very different phone call from what we've ever gotten before. So parents, teachers must be trained. I don't recommend that you try this without training and coaching, because it could backfire. If a teacher calls with the old style tone, then it could backfire. The other thing that happens at the home visits that makes families feel comfortable and that's different is that the teachers don't bring any paper or any pencils. They go, it's just them. Just like when I walk down the audience, because if you have paper and pencil, then the families feel like this is some sort of assessment.
They're being judged.
And so they're being judged. So now it's just, you know, Lisa, I'd love to talk to you about what are your hopes and dreams for your child, and how can we work together on making sure those hopes and dreams come true. So it really breaks down those barriers of hierarchy, and because now the teacher, first of all, is coming into the parent space, right, instead of it being the school space, or into the neighborhood where the families are, and we're just talking as people. And I will tell you that one visit or that one interaction really changes people's beliefs and values about one another, and the parents are more likely to then connect with that teacher because they did something that they've never seen people do before, which is to treat them like they have expertise and knowledge. So the Parent-Teacher Home Visit Project is look it up, and they do trainings, and it's a wonderful organization, and many districts in the U.S. are starting to pick up on this initiative.
They have a national conference in October.
Yes.
I think it's October. Or September.
Hi.
One of the questions I have, and I know that we are in a space at the moment where the whole concept of parent engagement is still, I wouldn't say hit and miss, because that sounds really negative, but because not everyone is in the same space at the same time, there's different levels, there's different beliefs about that. How damaging do you think it can be if there is only a small uptake in a school? So for example, in my head what I'm thinking is, some years for my primary school child, we have an awesome year where right from the get-go, that teacher is communicating with you, is talking to you, you've likely met them before school's even started, they know about your child, you know a bit about them, and you have a great year. And the next year, you get a teacher that isn't at that level. I'm just wondering for some parents as well, or a way that you see around, for some parents, I'm one of those people, I'll just keep knocking on the door and keep trying, but I think for some parents then there is that element of deflation and sometimes a resentment creating as well from other teachers who feel that level of expectation that they're not doing something that another teacher's doing, and for the parent that they're not getting a similar experience across those year levels. So what do you see as a way around those to keep moving forward in a positive manner?
Yeah, so I totally.
We've only got a few more minutes.
Okay, so I totally hear you. One of the things we talk about is like a pathway of family engagement, and the first step is really the vision of family engagement for a school and a common definition of family engagement. Because if you don't have a common definition at your school, where every teacher has that same definition of what family engagement is, then that's what you experience. So I had this wonderful experience in kindergarten, just exactly what you talked about, but then I moved to, let's say, first grade, and it's not the same. So that's really the first place to start for schools, is that creating a common vision where this is what we believe at our school and inclusive of our families, right? We come together and we say, this is what we believe family engagement is at our school. This is how we define it at our school. We create that definition together, and these are our shared beliefs. And if you don't do that first, then it's really hard then to say, let's dive in and do that parent university or do those workshops. That the first thing really is that baseline foundational step where we come together. That's how you change the culture. That's what I would say.
And I would say that at that particular school, it would be clear to me that family engagement is not seen as a systemic part of what that school should be doing to build effective practice for kids, right? Teaching and learning and all of that. So again, I think that you get hit or miss, as you said, family engagement at schools where it isn't seen as a systemic part of what people should be doing. You know, family engagement isn't a program, it's a practice. Yeah. And so when we say,
amen.
When we say we want effective family engagement, it means that we have to expect that our practitioners are proficient in that practice. You can't tell me that you are a proficient teacher, principal, or anything else nowadays if you're not proficient in family engagement. And so what we're trying to do now is to push policies so that we start to say part of proficient practice as a teacher is being able to show us how you can effectively engage families. So if you want a little tip on how you start changing the system, a part of it is that we have to change our teacher evaluation components to make sure that it includes family engagement. So we say proficiency looks like this.
and administrator.
Exactly. So it's not just teachers. I'm not picking on teachers here, because again, I think that if we say that, then we'll get the universities to make sure that you get those full courses in family engagement. Without that, it makes it very difficult, and again, very hit or miss.
Well, thank you so much. We will have to wind it up there because we're just right on time now. Afternoon tea awaits you. Thank you so much for so many questions.
Thank you.
Sure
Thank you.
We'd like to thank.
No, thank you. Oh, no, you don't share.
Well done, you guys. Thank you. Also, very conscious that we are going to rearrange the rooms again, so if everybody could just move out quickly so the walls can come back down. Thank you. That was fantastic.
Thank you.